All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time we're diving deep under the hood, right into the heart of your car. The engine.
Buckle up.
We've got this presentation on Engine Repair and Maintenance 101.
Yeah.
And today, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to equip all of you with the knowledge you need for at least some basic DIY engine care.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe we'll even turn you into a bit of an amateur engine detective by the end of this.
That's the goal.
All right, so let's kick things off with the basics.
Okay.
We're talking about internal combustion engines, right?
Right.
That's the most common type
Yeah.
and the kind that powers most cars on the road today.
Mm-hmm.
And they use controlled explosions to generate power, which has always fascinated me.
You know, it's interesting, that whole concept, using controlled explosions for power,
Yeah.
it's been around for centuries, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, early steam engines used a similar principle.
Oh, wow.
But the internal combustion engine, it kind of like refined and miniaturized that whole process.
Yeah.
And that's how we ended up with these powerful and efficient engines we have today.
So you're telling me my car engine is like a descendant of those massive steam engines?
Their way, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, well, let's break down these key players in this whole symphony of controlled chaos.
All right, yeah.
What are we looking at here?
So first, picture the engine block.
Oh.
It's like the foundation, this robust structure.
Yeah.
And it houses the cylinders.
Mm-hmm.
Inside each cylinder, you've got a piston moving up and down,
Okay.
driven by those controlled explosions we were talking about.
Right, right.
Now, this piston, it's connected to a connecting rod,
Okay.
which is attached to the crankshaft.
Mm-hmm.
And that crankshaft, that's where the magic happens.
Ooh, tell me more.
It converts the linear motion, that up and down of the pistons, into rotational force.
Interesting.
And that's what ultimately powers your wheels.
So it's not just explosions, it's about converting that explosive energy into something that can actually move the car. Fascinating. Now, what about all the other parts that were mentioned in this presentation?
Yeah.
Like valves, camshafts, fuel systems, all of that.
Yeah.
What are their roles?
They're all essential supporting actors in this whole process.
Okay.
Think of the valves in the camshaft as the gatekeepers.
All right.
They're controlling the flow of air and fuel into and out of the cylinders.
Got it.
They work together to make sure there's just the right amount of mixture present
Okay.
for those explosions to happen.
So it's like a carefully choreographed dance.
Pretty much, yeah.
That makes sense. And the fuel system, that delivers the fuel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the air system provides the oxygen
Yep.
that
Yeah.
moves together for combustion.
Exactly. And it's a delicate balance, you know.
Oh, I bet.
Too much fuel and you get incomplete combustion, wasted energy.
Mm-hmm.
Too little and you risk damaging the engine.
So you really got to get that balance right.
You do.
Okay, well, what about the other systems like lubrication and cooling? The presentation highlighted those as well.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing they're pretty important.
Oh, they're crucial. So the lubrication system, it relies on engine oil.
Okay.
And it's basically like the circulatory system of the engine.
Interesting analogy.
It reduces all that friction between the moving parts, prevents wear and tear, ensures everything's running smoothly.
Okay.
Without it, the engine would overheat and seize up pretty quickly.
So engine oil, basically the lifeblood of the engine.
You got it.
All right, that makes sense. And the cooling system, that's pretty self-explanatory. Keeps things from getting too hot.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it actually work?
It's a closed loop that circulates coolant throughout the engine,
Okay.
absorbing heat and transferring it to the radiator.
Right.
Then, the radiator releases that heat into the atmosphere, preventing overheating.
So it's like a little heat exchange going on.
Exactly. It's pretty crucial, especially with all those extreme temperatures from the explosions.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's incredible. I never realized how much was going on under the hood.
There's a lot happening in there.
So we've got this intricate dance of systems all working together to make the car move. But just like any complex machine, it needs regular checkups. Right.
Right.
That's where routine maintenance comes in.
Exactly. Think of routine maintenance as preventative medicine
Okay.
for your engine.
I like that.
It's about catching those potential problems early on,
Yeah.
making sure everything is in tip-top shape.
Mm-hmm.
And the presentation really emphasized sticking to the manufacturer's recommended maintenance schedule.
All right.
They know what's best for your engine.
That makes sense. They built it.
Yeah.
So what are some of the key things we should be doing regularly?
Okay.
The presentation mentioned checking fluids, inspecting belts and hoses,
Mm-hmm.
and replacing air filters.
Yep. Those are the big ones.
Can you walk us through why those are so important?
Sure. Let's start with fluids.
Okay.
Checking your oil level regularly is super crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, oil is the lifeblood of the engine, reduces friction, prevents wear. If you don't have enough oil, those parts could grind against each other and cause some serious damage.
Okay, so checking the oil is non-negotiable.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
Got it. What about coolant? What's that do, and why is it important to check it regularly?
Coolant prevents the engine from overheating, which, as you can imagine, is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
So checking the level ensures you have enough fluid to circulate, absorb all that heat from the engine.
Okay.
It's also a good idea to check the color of the coolant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if it looks rusty or discolored, it might be time for a flush and refill.
Good to know. So oil and coolant, check. What about those belts and hoses? They seem pretty important, too.
There really are. Belts and hoses, they're kind of like the unsung heroes of your engine.
Okay.
They connect various components, make sure fluids are circulating properly.
Right.
A worn belt can snap, leaving you stranded.
Oh, no.
And a leaky hose can lead to overheating or other problems. So regularly inspecting them for cracks or wear and tear can help prevent those unexpected breakdowns.
Wow, it's amazing how these seemingly small things can have such a big impact.
They really can.
What about air filters? How often should those be replaced and why?
The air filter, think of it like the lungs of your engine.
All right.
It keeps all that dirt, dust, debris from getting into the combustion chamber where it can cause damage.
Okay.
Now, a clogged air filter, that restricts airflow,
Right.
reduces engine power and fuel efficiency.
I see.
So replacing it regularly helps your engine breathe freely and perform at its best.
So we've talked about checking fluids, inspecting belts and hoses, replacing air filters.
Yep.
All crucial for maintaining a healthy engine.
For sure.
Now, I know a lot of people, myself included, dread going to the mechanic.
Yeah, I get it.
Are there any basic maintenance tasks that even a non-gearhead like me can tackle at home?
Absolutely. One of the most fundamental and rewarding DIY tasks is changing your own oil.
Okay, sign me up.
It's a pretty simple procedure, can save you some money,
Yeah.
give you a sense of accomplishment.
I'm always up for a challenge, especially if it means saving a few bucks
Right.
and getting a little bit more hands-on with my car.
Exactly. And the presentation walked through the steps.
Okay, good.
They break it down into 5 manageable steps.
Okay.
Gathering your materials, safely draining the old oil, replacing the filter, adding new oil to the correct level, and then properly disposing of the used oil.
Right.
It might sound a bit intimidating at first,
Yeah.
but with the right tools and a little guidance, it's totally doable.
Good.
But of course, safety always comes first.
Of course, yeah.
Working with a hot engine and fluids can be dangerous if it's not done correctly.
You're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
Safety first. So maybe we can walk through those oil change steps in a bit more detail later.
Definitely. We'll get to that.
I'm already feeling more confident
You could...
about tackling some DIY maintenance.
Awesome. But first, let's talk about another crucial part of your engine. Spark plugs.
Spark plugs. Okay, yes.
These little guys, they play a big role in keeping your engine happy.
I remember the presentation mentioning spark plugs.
Yeah.
And the ignition system.
Yeah.
They create the spark that ignites the fuel and air mixture. Right.
Right.
I'm curious to learn more about them and what can go wrong.
Let's dive into the world of spark plugs and ignition then.
Awesome. But first, we want to hear from you, our listeners. What are some of your engine-related questions or experiences? Have you ever tried any DIY engine maintenance? Share your thoughts with us. Welcome back to our Engine Deep Dive. Before we took a little break, we were just about to get into the world of spark plugs and ignition systems.
Yeah, these are key players.
So, spark it up. Tell me more. I know they're responsible for igniting the fuel and air mixture,
Right.
but what happens when they go bad?
Okay, so spark plugs.
Yeah.
They're essential for those controlled explosions that power your engine.
Okay.
They create the electrical spark that ignites the fuel and air mixture in the combustion chamber.
Right. Yeah, ports.
But over time, they wear down.
Okay.
The electrodes can erode, the gap can widen, they can get all fouled up with deposits.
Ooh, yucky.
Yeah, and when that happens, the spark weakens, becomes less efficient,
Okay.
and that leads to a bunch of issues.
Like what kind of issues are we talking about?
Yeah.
I'm guessing a weak spark isn't good for the engine's performance?
No, not at all. A weak spark can cause misfires.
It's fires. Okay.
That's where the fuel-air mixture doesn't ignite properly.
Oh, I see.
And that can lead to reduced engine power, rough idling, and decreased fuel efficiency.
So like my car's sputtering and jerking, it could be a spark plug issue.
Potentially, yeah.
Wow, those tiny little spark plugs can really cause some big problems.
They can, and in severe cases, a bad spark plug can even prevent the engine from starting at all.
Oh, wow. Okay, so definitely don't want to ignore those.
Definitely not.
What about the ignition system itself? What's its role and what can go wrong there?
So the ignition system is what generates that high voltage electricity
Right.
that's needed to create the spark. It's made up of several components: the battery, the ignition coil, the distributor, and the ignition wires.
So if any of those components malfunction, it could mess with the spark.
Exactly. A faulty ignition coil, a cracked distributor cap,
Yeah.
worn out ignition wires, those can all disrupt the flow of electricity,
Okay.
lead to weak or inconsistent sparks,
I see.
which can then cause all those same symptoms as a bad spark plug.
So misfires, rough idling, reduced power, starting issues, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, well, we've covered the basics of spark plugs and ignition systems
We have.
and why they're important to keep in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
But what about troubleshooting those other common engine problems that were mentioned in the presentation?
Right.
Things like starting issues, poor performance, unusual noises, warning lights, all that jazz.
Yeah, that's where things can get a bit tricky.
Right. How do we even begin to tackle those?
Troubleshooting is kind of like being an engine detective.
Ooh, I like that.
You got to observe the symptoms, analyze the possible causes, and then do some testing to narrow down the problem.
Okay, that makes it sound a little less daunting.
The key is to approach it systematically, not get overwhelmed.
That's reassuring because I tend to get overwhelmed easily when it comes to car problems.
I think a lot of people do.
So let's start with starting issues.
Okay.
What are some of the usual suspects? How do we even begin to figure out what's going on?
All right, well, starting issues.
Yeah.
They can be caused by a lot of different things, from a dead battery to a faulty starter motor, even a fuel system problem.
Okay, so many possibilities.
One of the first things to check is the battery.
Right. That seems like a logical starting point.
If it's dead or weak, the engine won't have enough juice to crank over.
Okay, easy enough to check.
Now, if the battery's fine, but the engine still won't start,
Yeah.
listen for the starter motor.
All right.
When you turn the key, do you hear a clicking sound?
Ooh, good point.
That could be a problem with the starter solenoid or the starter motor itself.
So you can actually hear what's wrong sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. And if the engine cranks but doesn't actually fire up, then we might be looking at a fuel or ignition problem.
Okay, so listening carefully can give us some clues.
It can.
Interesting. What about poor performance? What are some common causes of that, and how do we troubleshoot it?
So poor performance, it can show up in different ways.
Yeah.
Sluggish acceleration, reduced fuel efficiency, just a general lack of power.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced some of those.
It could be something as simple as a clogged air filter,
Oh, really?
or as complex as a faulty sensor.
Oh, boy.
So regular maintenance can definitely help prevent some of those performance issues.
Right, you got to keep those air filters clean.
Exactly. But if you're already experiencing poor performance, one of the first things to check is, yep, you guessed it, the air filter.
Makes sense.
A clogged air filter restricts airflow to the engine, reducing power and efficiency.
Okay, good to know. And an easy fix.
Relatively easy and inexpensive.
That's always a plus. What are other potential causes? I remember the presentation mentioned fuel injectors.
Yeah, those two.
Could they be contributing to poor performance?
They can. So fuel injectors, they're responsible for delivering fuel to the combustion chamber.
Right.
Over time, they can get clogged with deposits,
Ah,
which messes up the fuel spray pattern and affects combustion efficiency.
So a clogged fuel injector can basically starve the engine of fuel.
Essentially, yeah.
Wow. Okay, and what about spark plugs? Could those play a role in poor performance too?
They can. Worn spark plugs, like we talked about earlier, can cause those misfires,
Yeah, right.
which directly impacts performance and fuel efficiency.
It all comes back to those spark plugs.
It does. It's a good idea to check and replace them according to your manufacturer's recommended schedule.
Okay, good reminder. I need to check my manual.
Good idea.
So we've got air filters, fuel injectors, spark plugs, all potential culprits for poor performance.
Those are some of the big ones.
What about those unusual noises?
Hmm.
I imagine those can be pretty scary.
Yeah, hearing something weird coming from under the hood, it can definitely be unnerving.
For sure. What should we be listening for? What might those noises indicate?
Well, unusual noises, they're often the first sign that something's not right, like a knocking sound.
Oh, yeah.
That could be a problem with the bearings in the engine, which is a sign of serious wear and tear.
So if you hear knocking, get it checked out ASAP.
Definitely. Or a tapping sound.
Okay.
That could point to loose valves or worn-out lifters,
Interesting.
which affects the engine's timing and performance.
So any unusual noise is basically the engine's way of saying, hey, pay attention to me.
Exactly. It's a try for help.
All right, well, what about those dreaded warning lights?
Oh, yeah.
The check engine light especially seems to cause a lot of anxiety for car owners.
I get it. It can be intimidating.
Right. Is it always a reason to panic?
Not necessarily.
Okay, good.
Those warning lights, they're your car's way of communicating with you. They're not trying to scare you, they're alerting you to potential problems.
Okay.
But the check engine light, that one can be triggered by a whole range of issues.
Yeah.
From something as simple as a loose gas cap.
Really? That can trigger the check engine light.
It can, yeah. All the way to a more serious engine problem.
So not always a reason to panic, but definitely a sign that something needs attention.
Exactly.
What are some other common warning lights we should be aware of?
Well, there's the oil pressure warning light.
Okay.
That indicates low oil pressure, which is a big deal if you ignore it. It means the lubrication system isn't doing its job, and that could lead to some serious engine damage.
Yikes. Okay, and what else?
The temperature warning light, that tells you the engine's overheating,
Okay.
which could be caused by a coolant leak, a faulty thermostat, even a clogged radiator.
So many things to watch out for.
It seems like a lot, but knowing what these warning lights mean can really save you from a major engine headache.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot in this troubleshooting segment.
We have.
Starting issues, poor performance, unusual noises, warning lights.
Those are some of the big ones.
Before we move on and wrap up with some expert tips and additional resources, what are some key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
I think the biggest one is don't panic when you encounter an engine problem.
Good advice.
Take a deep breath, gather your information, and approach it systematically.
Yeah.
Armed with a little knowledge and the right resources, you can often figure out the issue and take the necessary steps to fix it.
Knowledge is power when it comes to car care. Now, before we move on to our final segment, I have a little challenge for all of you listening.
Okay.
Think back to a time when you experienced an engine problem. How did you approach it? Did you panic? Did you try to troubleshoot it yourself?
Yeah, share your stories.
We want to hear them. Welcome back to our Engine Deep Dive. We've covered so much ground today, from the basic components of an internal combustion engine all the way to troubleshooting those common problems you might run into.
It's been quite a journey under the hood.
It has. So now let's shift gears a bit and wrap things up with some key takeaways and some expert tips to help you, our listeners, become more confident and informed car owners.
Sounds good.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me from this presentation was the emphasis on preventative maintenance.
Oh, absolutely. It's so much easier and cheaper in the long run to address potential problems early on rather than waiting for a major breakdown.
I totally agree. It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
But even with the best preventative measures, things happen, right?
Oh, for sure. Cars are complex.
That's why it's so important to understand how your engine works and to know how to troubleshoot those common problems.
Couldn't agree more. And the presentation did a great job of breaking down those troubleshooting steps.
It did, yeah.
It's all about observation, analysis, and testing.
Right.
You pay attention to the symptoms, you can narrow down the possible causes, and take the right steps to fix it.
And even if you're not comfortable tackling the repairs yourself,
Right.
understanding the problem can help you talk to your mechanic more effectively.
Oh, definitely. That can save you a lot of money and headaches.
And avoid those unnecessary repairs.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to car care.
It really is. The more you know about your engine, the more empowered you'll feel to keep it running smoothly.
For years to come.
Exactly. So where can our listeners go to learn more to continue their engine education?
Ooh, great question. So the presentation was a great starting point,
He was.
but there are tons of other resources out there.
Of course. Yeah.
For detailed information specific to your car model,
Yeah.
the owner's manual is like gold.
Oh, the owner's manual. Yeah.
It's got maintenance schedules, fluid capacities, even troubleshooting tips just for your car.
It's that often overlooked treasure trove of car knowledge.
It really is. People should definitely dust those off.
What about online resources?
Oh, there's a ton of stuff online.
Okay.
Forums are great for connecting with other car enthusiasts, getting advice from DIRs,
Right. Yeah.
and YouTube. That's a fantastic resource, especially for visual learners.
I love YouTube tutorials.
There are tons of videos showing you step-by-step repairs and maintenance.
Okay, so we've got owner's manuals, online forums, YouTube tutorials, anything else?
Local libraries, they often have a good selection of automotive repair manuals.
Oh, yeah.
Those provide really in-depth information, detailed diagrams.
And sometimes you just can't beat a good old-fashioned book.
Exactly. And of course, don't underestimate the value of a good mechanic.
That's true.
Sometimes it's best to leave it to the pros,
Yeah.
especially for those complex repairs or if you're just not comfortable working on your car yourself.
Right, a trusted mechanic can be a real lifesaver.
For sure.
So as we wrap up this engine deep dive,
Yeah.
is there one final piece of advice you'd like to give our listeners?
Stay curious. Don't be afraid to pop the hood, get to know your engine.
I love that.
The more you learn about how it works, the more confident you'll become in taking care of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember, even if you're not a gearhead, knowing the basics of engine care can save you a lot of time, money, and headaches down the road.
Couldn't agree more.
So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those engines running smoothly.
Well said.
And that concludes our deep dive into engine repair and maintenance. I hope you all found it informative and empowering.
Yeah, me too.
Remember to check out those additional resources we talked about, and stay tuned for our next deep dive into another fascinating topic.
See you next time.
Until then, happy driving.